forms, and all kinds of bones mixed together from the various kinds of animals that do not have a natural habitat together, which are naturally enemies, but yet their bones broken and crushed, mixed together in caves in England and in other places, showing that they were thrown in there violently. A plausible explanation, and it is, of course, not without its problems completely, but I think the being. He created the earth to be inhabited, and so there were inhabitants upon the earth. There is even the suggestion that Satan perhaps ruled over the sphere of the earth. The anointed cherub that covereth in the garden of God, every precious stone is covering and so forth, that in reality it was here upon the earth that he had his dominion and his rulership. And that there were life forms upon the earth prior to the introduction of man. That there was plant life and various life forms. But the earth was just covered with water, frozen, and set aside for a period of time. A great ice age. That is possible. And in this particular book, he points out the fact, which is interesting indeed, that a year, Niagara Falls coming over, tremendous amount of water is eroding to the destruction. We don't know. God doesn't say. The man in his present form has existed on the earth for about 6,000 years in the time of that. And so the adherents of the gap theory see Genesis 1:1 as original creation, and the rest of Genesis as a process of recreation, as God began to recreate the earth in order to place man in his present form upon it. And thus the days of creation in Genesis are actually recreative days, as God is now setting the earth to place upon that earth. It is a very interesting billion years. It surely would not be out of harmony at all with what God has said here in Genesis 1. It is interesting that when Noah came out of the ark after the flood, then and to eat, to replenish the earth. Speaking of perhaps its pre-existence of forms of life, but man in his present form has only existed for about 6,000 years, and there is no way that anybody can prove that that is not true. So we look at Genesis, and we see in chapter 1, the beginning, God creating the heaven and the earth. In verse 2, we see the earth without form and void, darkness, covered with water, and the Spirit of God brooding over the face of the deep. In verse 3, the beginning of the creative acts of God. Notice in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, which would of course include the stars and all. And now we see the first thing that God declares, as the earth was covered with darkness, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Now it could be that the earth was in a dark nebulae, that there was no light coming to the earth, that in this darkness, this dark nebula, that the earth just flowed. the Great Ice Age. It is interesting that when we look at the creative days, those forms of life, such as plant life, that could have survived in the earth during an ice age, are spoken of as not being created, bara, but being assembled, asa, the assembling. But the life forms that could not survive a great ice age are spoken of as being bara, created. There are many forms of life that could have survived an ice age, and all they needed was the proper environment to spring forth again. Out here in the desert a few years ago, they had an unusual storm, and a lake that had been dried for years was suddenly filled with water. And the next thing they knew, there was a form of shrimp in the water. Somehow, the processes were there, still in the earth or whatever. When the water came, that was all that was necessary to bring forth this dormant form of life. And so there are many life forms that can survive. There are some that could not. When we get to the life forms that could not survive a great ice age, then you come again to the word bara, as God began to form and create out of nothing the life forms that could not have survived the great ice age. Let there be light. The removing of those dark gases, which we do not understand, but we do on the first day, if you accept the recreation process, the earth was brought out of the darkness of the gases and still clouded with a fog. You could distinguish between the evening and the morning, or the night and the day. God said, let there be a firmament. The word firmament in the Hebrew is rakriah, which means a limitless expanse. Now describe for me space. It's a limitless expanse. Let there be a space, God said. Above the earth would have done a tremendous thing as far as the climate of the earth is concerned. It would have caused a mild, equal kind of climate around the entire earth. Tropical vegetation in their digestive tract. It would surely account for the forest that one time existed at the South Pole, because we have found the charcoal deposits under 200 feet of ice. This blanket of water around the earth would probably also have protected the earth from many more of the cosmic radiations that are constantly bombarding the earth. Also, the earth would have been protected by the greater magnetic force that existed at that time that surrounds the earth. The earth is surrounded by a magnetic field. 136 years ago, a Dutch scientist first measured this magnetic field. Each year since, we have been measuring the magnetic field around the earth, and we find that the magnetic field is diminishing at a constant rate. In fact, this is the longest age dating factor that we have as far as the earth is concerned. We don't have anything that comes up and surrounds around the pole, back and around, and it seems to have a interesting kind of an effect by shielding off the cosmic rays that are constantly bombarding these little rays that go shooting, what do they call them, neutrinos or something, that go right through the earth. And you can't really shield yourself. They come right through and hit you from your